Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started for this evening. So good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Felton. I work with the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District. And tonight I am joined by Laura Allen with Greywater Action. Hey, Laura, how are you?
Doing great, thanks.
Awesome, glad to hear it. So tonight's presentation is going to be on rainwater harvesting. So just to go over a couple of housekeeping items before I hand it over to Laura for the evening. We are recording tonight's presentation and we will be posting it onto our YouTube channel. I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who has registered for this workshop. In that email, you will get a link to that webinar recording, as well as any of the resources that we discussed this evening. I'll also include my email as well as Laura's. So if you do have any follow-up questions after the webinar, please feel free to go ahead and reach on out to us. At the end of the evening tonight, when you do log off, a link will pop up for a survey. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple of moments to fill out that survey, it is a huge help for us in developing these workshops and webinars so that we can make sure to best tailor suit them for your needs. Now, just to go over the format for tonight, I'm going to briefly introduce the Soil and Water Conservation District. I will then hand it over to Laura for tonight's presentation. And at the very end, we'll have time for Q&A. At the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a little icon, a Q&A icon. If you do have any questions along the way tonight, go ahead and click that icon and you can put your question in right then and there. And we'll go ahead and read those out to Laura at the very end of the presentation, just so that we can keep going through the evening here. So quickly to talk about the Soil and Water Conservation District. So the Tualatin SWCD, as we're known, is one of 45 soil and water conservation districts in the state of Oregon. Our service area is Washington County, which is just west of the Portland metro area. Our district is intended to work with residents to help solve natural resource issues within our area. Those natural resource issues deal with soil, water, wildlife habitat, you name it. And we do that through a wide variety of ways. We do that through a technical assistance program. So we have specialists on staff that can actually offer advice who can go out to your site and actually walk the grounds and talk a little bit about your goals and how you might be able to accomplish them. We do that through a financial assistance program, whether that's through direct financial aid, through grants, and other sort of funding opportunities. And we also do that through education opportunities. And that's just like the presentation that you'll be seeing tonight. While our service area is only in Washington County, so we can only offer that financial assistance in Washington County, I do want to recommend that you reach out and research any of the soil and water conservation districts that might be a part of your area. There is a SWCD for just about every county across the United States, and many of them offer similar programs as we do. So whether you're in Washington County or outside, you most likely have a soil and water conservation district or a conservation district that can help you accomplish any of your goals on your property. And if you need help being directed to one of those, feel free just to respond to that follow-up email, and I'm more than happy to help direct you. Now with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Laura. If you have any technical issues along the way, I will be monitoring the chat. So go ahead and just message me there and I can help out as best as I can.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Laura, yeah, you're back. Your mic didn't work at first, but I think you're good now.
Okay, great. I was gonna say, I'm just gonna share my screen. And can you see my screen right now?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, yeah, let me know if anything is not working too well.
Sounds great.
I'm gonna just make sure it's advancing. You see that?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, great. So now I'll really get started. So my name's Laura Allen. I'm with an organization called Greywater Action, and we educate about on-site water solutions, rainwater harvesting, greywater reuse, as well as waterless toilets. So I'm really excited to talk about rainwater tonight. It's a great subject for the fall. I know we've been getting a lot of rain and lots of wind and exciting weather. So we're going to jump right in. And I just want to start by saying that harvesting the rain is really ancient business. Like, people have been doing this for thousands of years all over the world, especially in places where we consider very arid and very dry. People incorporated rainwater harvesting into their cities, into their homes, into their communities. So what we're talking about tonight is might be new to some of us, but it's really not new for us as humans. And even today, rainwater is the sole water supply for millions of people around the world, from international, all over the world, as well as in the United States. In Hawaii, there's whole communities that were built in places that don't have any groundwater and don't have a municipal supply. So all the homes use rainwater as their only water supply. Texas has a lot of rainwater for only water supply. San Juan Islands, there's these kind of spatterings of communities around the United States. But also it's many places that the rain is completely ignored and shunted away. So tonight we're going to talk about, benefits of rainwater is going to be kind of incorporated into everything we talk about tonight, but it's an obvious way to replace water that's coming from your municipal supply with an on-site water. So it's basically like this free, clean water source falling from the sky that we can harvest and use to put beneficial use. We're also going to talk about stormwater, which is a huge problem in our cities and towns and world, and how we can turn that from a problem into a solution. We'll talk about rain gardens. This is ways to collect rain in the ground. We'll talk about catchment, so tanks, ways we can store the rain, and talking about these different components and different design considerations. And before we get started into rainwater, I just want to contextualize it as it's kind of like one tool in the toolbox of how to have more on-site water and how to rely less on our municipal supplies. So we have rainwater and stormwater. Those are two water supplies we'll talk about tonight. There's also gray water, which is water that you already used in your home. There was a webinar on this just a little while ago. It's recorded, so you can watch that if you missed it. Gray water comes from showers, sinks, and washing machines. Black water, that's combined wastewater from a home, and it's typically not used at the residential scale, though it is in some places, and it is on a larger scale. And then some places have what's called mechanical water. So rainwater is a piece of this, and it's a really important water source, especially in our wet climate. We do, even though we're in a Mediterranean climate, which means we have a big dry season, we get a lot of rain when it does rain, which is a lot more than some of our neighbors to the south, like California. And so when it rains, some people think, oh no, it's raining, like I gotta get my umbrella or my raincoat, and it's kind of this annoying thing. And other people are super excited about it. And rain, historically, rain operated really differently in our communities, in our cities. Before we developed our cities, and cities being places that have lots of buildings, that have roofs, and that have roads, a lot of hardscape. Hardscape is what build substances that rainwater doesn't soak in. Before that was developed, our landscapes infiltrated water, a lot of water infiltrated into the ground. So there wasn't a lot of runoff, much less flooding and localized flooding conditions. And the water that ran off was pretty clean because it was cleaned through this healthy landscape. But after urban development, the way we built our cities, the rainwater flushes over our cities and picks up a lot of pollution, and a lot of it leaves our landscapes. And this is causing a lot of challenges and problems for our environment, as well as for life in our cities. And I just want to show you a chart about streams. So just kind of connecting what we can do in our own homes to the environment, kind of the bigger environment around us. This orange line that you see, this is the flow of in a stream over time as it's raining. So if it rains, you can see that orange line, it goes up over time. There's this bump, and then it slowly goes down back to the baseline level. The blue line is what happens in a stream if in a city, kind of a typical city, where rainwater is not being managed or used at all. When it rains, all that water flushes out really fast. You can see a huge spike. There's much more of it, and then it's gone really quickly. And you can imagine that this causes a lot of problems for all the living things in our streams that are used to the conditions the orange line is representing, kind of these swells of water, higher flows, but it's not like this giant spike of flood water, basically. So it causes a lot of problems for all the living things in our streams. It also causes problems for the structure of our streams. It causes lots of erosion, lots of cutting of banks, flooding. So by building our cities, we've caused a lot of problems kind of downstream that us living in our homes might not even be aware that all that rain running off our driveway is causing these problems. And so this yellow line, this is what we can do if we start managing stormwater or rainwater better in our cities. This means all of us doing small things in our homes to keep the water out of this flushing situation. And so we can control that through rainwater catchment, through rain gardens, which I'm going to describe more in a minute. And we can really lower that peak and slow out that water as it goes through our communities. And so just some terminology before we get started. Rainwater is kind of obvious. It's water, the rain that comes down. And when we're talking about using rainwater, and we say rainwater, we mean it's landed on the roof and we've collected it before it got to the ground. That's a rainwater catchment system. Stormwater, this is also rainwater. When it rains, the rain comes down, but once it lands on the surface of the ground, we now call it stormwater. And it's regulated a little differently, and what you could find in it is a little different because now it's washing over our streets, and it has a different quality than rainwater does. So when I talk about rainwater, I might use rainwater for any water coming from the sky, but when we talk about a rainwater system, it's collecting it before it hit the ground. And when we talk about stormwater, we're talking about managing that rainwater after it's gotten onto the ground. So I hope that makes sense. And stormwater is a source of a lot of pollution. I've already been kind of touching on this, but just to really drive this point home, our cities have lots of things on them that are unhealthy for the environment. There's dog poop, there's herbicides, there's pesticides, there's brake dust, there's oil slicks, all this stuff, there's trash that's on the surface. When it rains, all that gets flushed and washed away, goes straight down our storm drains, and usually is directly discharged into a waterway. So a creek connects to rivers and bays and oceans. And so that's how a lot of pollution gets out into the environment, is through our stormwater system, our system that we've designed to get rainwater away from our homes and streets so we don't have flooding. We don't want this. We don't want this rainwater to become this big problem. There's a lot of things we can do. Some of them are very, very simple. Just thinking about what kind of materials do we want to use around our home? If we want a path, do we have to have a cement path? Could it be a wood chip path instead? Wood chips will soak the water down into the ground and the water won't run off. Whereas a cement path, the water can't soak into it and it will run off of that landscape. Having a lot of plants. So having deep-rooted plants, a lot of native plants, those are really good at opening soil and increasing infiltration in your landscape. So you could have this beautiful, lovely landscape that's also soaking up rainwater and preventing pollution downstream. So that's something that's really, really simple and doesn't take a lot of shifts. If you are in a decision-making point about what am I gonna put in my landscape. If your landscape's already constructed, then we need to make some changes to it. And I'm going to start by talking about what's called passive water harvesting or in-ground harvesting, where we are taking the rainwater as it comes off of our roofs and off of our streets and it's turning into stormwater, and we're trying to stop it from leaving our properties and soak it into the ground. So this picture is showing a rain garden. It's just a special place where the ground, you can see the ground is curving downwards, kind of like a shallow bowl. It's planted with plants that are appropriate to grow in these conditions where they're going to get wet sometimes and then dry out other times. So they're usually native plants. And they open up the soil. You can see those roots are really going down deep, and they let the rainwater infiltrate into the ground. So rain garden, this is a very lovely garden feature. You could think about it as just something beautiful that you could put in your landscape. They also, rain gardens don't require potable water irrigation. So once you get your rain garden established, you now have this nice landscaped area that you never have to water, which is always a plus. They also clean and infiltrate stormwater, and they help prevent flooding. So they're a way that we can get these kind of multi-benefits in our landscape. We can have these lovely, beautiful landscapes that are also preventing flooding, cleaning the water, doing all these other benefits to our personal yard as well as our community, the watersheds in our community. And just a little bit more about the rain garden. So how it works, you are directing water into it from something that can't soak in water. So usually it's from your roof, your downspouts, where there's a lot of water coming off. Could also be from your driveway, something that has hardscape. You direct it into your rain garden. There's edges called berms to keep the water in. So you're creating this bowl and you design it so the water it'll pool up. You don't want it to pool up too long because then mosquitoes could breed. So it will pool up for about 24 hours and then it should soak away. But it gives this nice big space to collect a bunch of water at a time and then slowly soak it down over a day or maybe two. So that's what a rain garden kind of basically what it is. They can look really different from each other. The picture on the upper left, that's in Washington State. And you can see the plants are really different from the one on the lower right, which is in Southern California, but they're both rain gardens. The plants in the middle will actually be in standing water for short periods of time. So they have to be the kind of plant that can handle that. The plants on the edge, they can be plants that will get irrigation from the rain, but mostly they're sitting in dry soil. So in the lower picture, you can see that there's like a cactus is part of this rain garden. So they can look different because they're gonna be adapted to your climate, but they're serving the same function. And so why you want to use a rain garden in your rainwater harvesting systems is you want to use a rain garden to irrigate native plants and to prevent stormwater pollution. You also really deeply moistening the soil in your landscape so it can shorten your irrigation season. If you have other nearby plantings, it can really hydrate your soil. So if you have trees nearby, they won't need irrigation as frequently or as kind of early into the irrigation season as a yard that doesn't have this. So they do bring these benefits to your site. What rain garden doesn't do is allow you to access that water later on. That's when we need to jump into the tanks where we're storing up rainwater for later on. Just want to show you another picture. This is in, I believe this is Arizona. This is a new development. So you can see when they were making the landscaping, they made those planted areas like a bowl. So the picture on the left, you can see that pre-planting. It's puddling, lots of water's puddling there. Now the picture on the right, that's the same area, just with all the plantings. So when it's finished, you really can't tell that this is performing this really important ecological function. It's managing the stormwater, filtering it, cleaning it, preventing flooding, all of that. When you look at it, it just looks like a really nice landscape. And it can fit into, there's many different plants you can choose. You can really make it fit with the kind of things that you want to grow in your landscape. This is also implemented at a city scale. Currently, this is a law, so now any new development has to manage stormwater, so you're going to see this more and more. So you've probably seen these in parking lot strips or sidewalk strips where they are directing street runoff into these planted areas. Sometimes there's grates, so you can't actually see how the water gets in there, but sometimes it's just open like that as a residential street. So these are employed all over cities to try to manage all the water in the city that needs to go somewhere. And this can be done on kind of the larger landscape area. These two pictures are showing kind of the before and after on a larger landscape. You can see how they can even create these habitat zones and just really beautifying the area by diversifying the plantings and keeping the rainwater on the site. The last thing I want to mention about stormwater is stormwater can be collected and then cleaned and then used for a non-potable or a non-drinking need, like toilet flushing. These are usually only done at the commercial scale. So there's examples, all over the country where these commercial buildings or larger, like institutional sized buildings are collecting stormwater, they're filtering it, they're cleaning it, and they're using it for non-potable use. So now I'm going to shift to talk about storing the water and using it for later. The thing about rainwater is there is a lot of it. So if you have a roof like a house, you're going to be able to collect a bunch of water, but it's not always when you need it, especially if we're using it for irrigation, which is the easiest way to use rainwater is just to store it and then simply irrigate the landscape because you don't need any extra filtration or disinfection. It's pretty simple. But the timing doesn't always match up, especially in our Mediterranean climates where we get all of our rain one part of the year and then all of our irrigation need is a different part of the year. So we have to be managing that. I just want to show you this little chart showing the potential on a 2,000 square foot home in these different US cities. So you can see even in dry, desert communities that get not very much rain, it's still a bunch of water that adds up over the course of those 8 inches of rain. And then in places that are very rainy, like going down to the bottom, Miami, Florida, you can see that the 59 inches they get is 66,000 gallons. So that's a bunch of water. And so another thing to keep in mind is when we are using rainwater in our homes, we can use these different approaches together. We can integrate how we are harvesting the water. So maybe from one of your gutters, your downspouts, you might send that water into a rain garden, like the picture on the front, and just flow and sink that water and have this lovely garden feature. Then maybe from another downspout, or maybe two, you could combine them going into a larger collection tank called a cistern. Sometimes people who have small yards, they might do what's called catch and release. So maybe they don't have room for a large rain garden, but they want to manage the maximum amount of water. So you might have a small collection like a rain barrel, which is about 50 gallons, that can fill up and then slowly send that water into the rain garden. So it adds some extra capacity to the system. So there's ways that we can kind of use these different concepts and have them work together to keep you make the best use of all the rainwater coming off of our site. So here's a couple of, this is a picture showing different ways you can collect rainwater. And you can see in just 1 inch of rain, you can collect about 600 gallons. So that's, really adds up quick. The simple rain barrel in the front, that's a single rain barrel. That's a small thing that's usually any site has room for that. And the cost is very low. It's very easy to put in. And it's a great reminder of how much water we have, how much potential we have, even though a rain barrel is not really tapping into the scale of potential we have on our roofs. A lot of times you can connect rain barrels together. So that on the lower, kind of the back under that deck in the back, you can see there's 8 rain barrels connected together. So that's 400 gallons of storage. So you can make the rain barrels add up to a bunch of storage. And they're really nice to use in what we call like dead spaces, like under decks or kind of narrow behind buildings that's really unused. So they can fit into these really unused spaces and they can connect together to increase their capacity. And then we have the tanks, like kind of the cylindrical circular tanks. You can see in the picture, getting to the left side of the picture, there's a 3,000 gallon tank that those usually can be kind of near the building. They're big, but they're not too big. And then in this home, they have an even bigger 10,000 gallon tank that's located away from the building. And I'm going to talk about how you get the water from the house, into these various collection systems, but you can put the larger collection farther away from your building so you don't have to have the visual impact of it. And so how we typically use residential rainwater in 3 main ways. The first one is using the water for outdoors in a really simple system. So having a rain barrel or a system or a cistern or tank, those words, we can kind of use them interchangeably. And they don't have any connection to the domestic water supply. So there's just a separate system. We can use a hose or just a really simple irrigation system to send the water outside. This is the most common way to use rainwater in our area. The second way is also to use the rain outdoors, but to send it into a drip irrigation system. So this, you're gonna have a tank or cistern, and you might have a pump, you might not. There are 0 pressure components that you can use. You can have a drip system that runs off of very low pressure, which a rainwater system has, or you can have a pump. And in a more sophisticated system, you can have it connected into the rest of your water supply in ways that protect the drinking water. So the system is going to be more complicated, but you can have it where if you run out of rainwater, your system can switch over and then finish the irrigation with the domestic water supply. That's another way. And then they're sending the rainwater back inside. So these are kind of increasing in complexity. So inside our homes, we have non-potable uses of water like toilets and laundry. Toilets and laundry don't need to be, no one's drinking that water, so it could be a lower quality. And rainwater can really easily supply these. It's relatively clean with just a little bit of filtration. It can technically or functionally go into these fixtures and appliances and be used instead. Rainwater with extra filtration, disinfection, it can be brought up to drinking water quality. And so it can be supplying the whole house water use. The permits for that's a different story, but technically, yes, it can definitely do that. Whether you can get permission to do that is a different question. And that really depends on the state and local jurisdiction. But currently, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's much easier to get an indoor system for non-potable uses than it is for potable, barring the examples I gave in the beginning, like in Hawaii, where there's no other options of water. But in places where there is other options for water, it's pretty easy to use rainwater for toilet flushing or laundry. Though the system, of course, is going to cost more. So most people are just going to keep the water outside. So I'm going to show you a few calculations that you might want to do, and just want to kind of present this as optional. If you have a house, you're going to be able to fill, and you live in like an urban or suburban area, you're going to be able to fill any size tank that you feel comfortable, plopping down in your yard. If you live in a rural place or have a bigger lot, then you might really want to calculate this to make sure you can fill it if you're thinking about a 10,000 gallon tank, for example, or if you are collecting off of a very small roof, like maybe it's a garden shed, or maybe you're doing like a project in a community garden and you don't have a building, you just have like a shade structure or something. So I'm going to show you how to do this, but just know if you want to do rainwater and you're in a kind of urban or suburban home, you don't need to do this. You'll see why, because the answer is almost always yes, you can fill your tank, no problem. So the first thing you do, like step one, is you find your roof's catchment area. And the catchment area is the same as the footprint of your house. The slope of your roof, the pitch of your roof doesn't impact this at all. So you just need to know how wide is the house and how long is the house. And then you multiply those two numbers together. So in this example, this house is 80 feet long and 30 feet wide, so it's 2,400 square feet. Of course, your house might not be an exact rectangle. You might have little offshoots, and so you might have to add a couple of calc things together to get your total area. Or if you're just doing a portion of your home, you can just do it from like the portion where maybe you have one roof where the gutters are going to one place, you could find the area of that section. So going back to our example, so this is the area of the roof, the catchment surface in this example. So the next thing we need to do is calculate the potential rainwater potential. So we start with our catchment area, and then we multiply it by rainfall. And we usually use average rainfall, but depending on your situation, you might want to use like a dry year. If you were, for example, building a house and your only water supply was rainwater, you would not want to plan for average, because we know that many years we don't get the average rainfall. You would want to plan for kind of your worst case scenario drought year to size your system. But for us who have other water sources, we just use average rainfall because it tends to work. So we have catchment area times rainfall, and then there's a coefficient that's going to convert inches. We put our rainfall in inches, and then we're having a catchment area in square feet, and we want to get the answer in gallons. So it's just a conversion coefficient that does that. So we multiply those three together, and then we're going to get gallons per year. So this example, a 2,400 square foot home times 46 inches. I use the average in Eugene where I live times the coefficient, and I got 60,480 gallons per year. So that is a lot of water. And just to note on that coefficient number, the 0.56, there's a built-in efficiency of 90%, just assuming that not every drop is going to get into your system. Some's going to blow away, some's going to splash out. So there is a little bit of a efficiency loss there. Okay, so now you know you're probably going to fill your tank up, no problem. The other thing I want to address before we get into details of how to catch it is rainwater illegal in Oregon? I have heard this so many times. People think it's illegal. Someone told them it was illegal. This is a complete myth. Rainwater is legal in Oregon, but there is a reason that people think that. And it's kind of, it's a little bit humorous, but I don't know when this was. It was, I don't know, I'd say at least 10 years ago or maybe more. Some of you might be more familiar. There was a person in Oregon that built a giant, basically a lake on his property without a permit. So you can see the size of this. This is massive. And he didn't have a permit, and he got in trouble because he did this, because this clearly has a big effect on the environment around him and on his neighbors. And the headlines of these articles about this thing was, man, I don't know if he's arrested or fined or whatever happened to him for collecting rainwater. Rainwater system illegal in Oregon. So these headlines really led people to believe that the problem was he was collecting rainwater, but he actually wasn't. This is filled with rainwater, but he had created a giant lake using earth movers and all of that. So rainwater, collecting it off your roof, that's always been legal. It's still legal. There's nothing illegal about it, though there's some safety considerations you need to follow, and maybe you'll need a permit if you want to do like an indoor system. But if you just want to collect water off your roof, use it in your yard, there's nothing stopping you, just encouragement to make sure you do it safely. So again, in Oregon, yes, rainwater systems are legal. If your system is under 5,000 gallons, you don't need a permit. If you're on a flat lot and your tank is sturdy, meaning it's not like a super tall, narrow tank, it's more of a squat wide tank, which most of them are. It's legal without a permit. If you want to pressurize the water or you bring it back indoors, then you would need a permit. And these are some of the codes that you can look into if you want to research more about the legalities. There's often rebates and incentives for them. So I don't know where all of you live, but I encourage you to look for your local water agency or your city and see if there's any discounts or incentives to support you on this journey. I just put up a website from Portland because they have some encouragement incentives for people who are managing stormwater on their properties. So you can go to that, the Clean River Rewards. So we'll start with the smallest system, the rain barrel. It's about 50 gallons. These barrels, you can purchase them new, but you can also often get them repurposed, which means they were used for a food grade application. They use these barrels to transport all sorts of food grade material like syrup and flavorings and just all sorts of things, olives and olive oil and lots of stuff. And people get them, wash them, and then sell them. You can sometimes find them on like Craigslist. Sometimes stores will sell them, like irrigation or farm supply stores will get them a repurposed barrel supply and sell them. Also, the beverage industry uses them a lot. So it's great if you want to do a rain barrel. I would really encourage you to get a recycled / reused food grade barrel, so you're not making new plastic when you don't need to. So here we have our barrel. You're bringing the water in from your downspout. It's screened. Whenever you have standing water, mosquitoes can breed. So you want to make sure that any opening, any place mosquitoes can get in, like this big open barrel, is screened. You want to make sure you're considering like kind of general safety, like this barrel. You don't want a kid to grab it and pull it toward them. That could tip it over if it was partially full. And that could be, dangerous. So you want to make sure it's strapped for safety. When you get to the big tanks, there's no way you're pulling those over, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. But when you have an elevated barrel, a child could pull that over, or an adult. So make sure that's strapped. Overflow, when the barrel fills up, which will happen quickly, you want to make sure the water can go somewhere easily. Direct it to a rain garden or another suitable place. And then you have an outlet. So it could just be a spigot that you open up and fill a gardening can, or it could be a hose, something pretty simple, because 50 gallons is not too much water when we're talking about irrigation. Like I mentioned before, you can connect all these barrels together through the bottom. So you only the rainwater enters one barrel, and through that bottom, there's a tube connecting them all. So they all kind of fill and empty as one unit. And each one has a little vent to let air out as the barrel is filling with water. The air inside it needs a place to escape. So you have little screen vents on all of the barrels. And then you have an outlet. So pictures. There is a system called Blue Barrel Systems. This is actually a company, and they use these blue barrels, which are very common in the beverage industry. So they're probably the most common type of barrel you can get that's repurposed. And so what they've done is they've created these kits to give people all the materials to take this kind of standard barrel that they can get in many parts of the country and convert it into a rainwater system. So I really like that of being able to support people to get their local reused product and then turn it into a rainwater system. So here's an example of that. And they use this diverter where they're diverting out of the gutter. I'll show it again in another picture. It's pretty cool because you just tap into the gutter, the water flows in and fills your barrels. And when it's full, then no more water comes in. So you don't have to have a separate overflow. This kind of function as the inlet as well as the overflow. So there's lots of ways to fill your barrel. In the first picture I showed you, the downspout is coming straight into the barrel, like in that upper left. The middle of this image is showing the way that you just tap right into the downspout, and then the rainwater flows into your barrel as well as doesn't flow in. It goes back down when it's full. So that one's really handy and also easier to install. You just drill a hole in the gutter, excuse me, in the downspout, and then add this apparatus. And there's variations on that, as the diagram on the right shows. And here's one, if you're interested in that, just to give you an example. There's several companies that make the same concept. Just a reminder that you're always screening openings. Different types of systems have different ways to get in. I'll go back to the Blue Barrel system. This one doesn't have openings, it just has screened vents. So this one wouldn't need like big mosquito screens. But if you're running your rainwater right into the top and you've created an opening, or maybe it didn't have a lid or something, you really need to make sure that's screened. And I want to touch on, how much irrigation. So when you're using a water source for irrigation, you need to know how much to water your plants, and that can help with your sizing. And just to kind of show you how not much water is in 50 gallons. If you have 100 square feet of landscape, if it's a lawn, it needs about 90 gallons per week in the summer. So that is more than your rain barrel couldn't even water that patch of lawn for a week. If you got to a vegetable garden instead, then it could 70 gallons. It's still more than a rain barrel, but it's getting closer. But if you were irrigating your low water use plants, like your drought tolerant native plants, then they only need about 15 gallons to look really nice. Of course, once they're established, you could maybe not irrigate them, but to make them look more lush and lovely, you can irrigate them a little bit. And now you can see, if you're doing a water efficient landscape, your rainwater can really go so much farther. So this is another good way for people to start, if they haven't already, to start shifting their concept of what is a beautiful landscape in my community, maybe shifting away from something that's very resource intensive, like a lawn, to something that might bring extra benefits and use a lot less water, like some native plantings. This also drives people to think, well, a rain barrel, it's a great place to start, but maybe I want something bigger because I've got a lot more water and I want to use it. That's where you get into your catchment systems. So this is it's similar. You have a tank, it's like a barrel, it's just bigger. There's a few other pieces because now there's more water and now you're storing the water for longer because it's not going to be run out in less than a week. So you have your catchment surface, you have your roof. It could be any type of roof. The only type that's not suitable is going to be a wood roof that has had some kind of like a fungicide to prevent moss from growing. That would not be suitable for rainwater catchment. But other than that, your standard asphalt shingle roof is fine. Metal roofs are great. Pretty much any roof. You have to have gutters. So if you don't have gutters, you do need to install them. And then you need a downspout. So some way to get from the gutter down into your collection. In this picture, you can see the downspout is going into something called a leaf screen, and it's really common to put your first screen up at the high point where the water is first leaving the gutters, and that keeps all the leaves out of your system that might be getting into the gutters. So after that, the water is now into a tube, so it's in a closed tube, like a pipe, and now it's starting to flow to the tank. There's a piece called a first flush diverter. It's just a pipe right in front of that tank. And I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, but basically just so you're aware, it keeps away the first rain of the season, the dirtiest rain. So if your roof is dusty and dirty and there's stuff up there, the first time it rains, it's going to wash all that off. And then the next time it rains, the roof's going to be much cleaner. So this first flush diverter keeps out that first flush of rain. It goes down that pipe, and inside that pipe there's a ball that starts floating. So as the pipe fills up, the ball plugs the top, and now that pipe full of dirty water is sealed off, and then the clean rainwater fills the tank. That dirty water pipe, you can either manually empty it, or oftentimes these come with a little small drip in the bottom, so they drip out over the next couple of days, and then they're ready to go in case there's another long stretch between rain events. So we have our tank. Sometimes you have a screen on the top, sometimes they don't. It kind of depends on how they're set up and how big of an opening there is. And then they have an overflow, and then they have an outlet. Maybe it would have filters and pumps if it's going to be an indoor system, or if it's going to go into a drip irrigation, like a large drip irrigation system. Now we'll look at all this a little more detail. So the tank, that green plastic tank, that is the most common, the most affordable. Some people think it's ugly. I actually don't. I think it looks just fine. And I've recently learned that it's a chalkboard. You can draw on it with chalk, which kids love, and then it just washes away when it rains. You can also paint it. You can also put a screen, like if you wrap it with like chicken wire or something and then grow plants up it, you can cover it. So you can really get it to fit into your aesthetic. It comes from a couple 100 gallons up to thousands and thousands of gallons in size. And you can also connect big tanks, like you can connect 3,000 gallon tanks together too, in the same way you can connect rain barrels together, which is something else people do rather than having to deal with moving a like 8 to 10,000 gallon tank. Sometimes it's easier to have a couple of 4,000 gallon tanks connected together. Going down, there's a 10,000 gallon tank. These are metal tanks. They have a liner inside, and they're often used in more rural situations or places where it's the only water supply. Upper picture, there's some 205 gallon tanks connected together. So these are smaller and narrower. So in this home, in this kind of side area of a home, they don't have space. It would block the windows and the view and get in the way of the path to put a big tank, but they do have room to put several of these 200 gallon tanks connected together. So that's something else that you can do to work with the space that you have available. And then there's also other smaller metal tanks. There can be cement tanks that are poured on site. There's ferro cement tanks. There's sometimes wooden tanks. There are other options, but these are the most common. So you have to get water from your roof to the tank, and there's two ways to do it. The lower picture is called a dry system, and this is basically you just have a pipe that goes from the gutter downspout straight into the top of your tank. That works really well if your tank is right next to your house or very close to the house, because there's a pipe going in the air. An alternate to that, if you don't want your tank to be right by the house, if you want it farther away, that is called a wet system. And with this system, the downspout goes into a pipe. It goes down under the ground. You can travel underground, just keep it out of the way, and then you can come back up into your tank. And this works by gravity as long as the opening of your tank is lower than where you're tapping into the downspout. So there has to be a little bit of a height difference to account for a friction through the pipe. With that little bit of difference, just a couple inches, not very much, then the water just flows by gravity up into your tank, and you don't have to be having a pipe in the air over your head. It looks really nice. You can have a lot more flexibility in where you situate that tank. If you're in a freezing climate, the standing water in that pipe in the winter might be a problem if you don't bury it too deep. And so people often put a drain down somewhere in the system where you can empty it if you're in a place that has really hard freezes. So you can empty that pipe in the winter and then close it again. So I'm going to talk a minute about how to keep the rainwater clean. There is the beginning of the very first screen, which is the leaf eater, where it has different names. That's, I think, a brand name, but basically it's this little kind of piece that sits right under the downspout. And when the water flows onto it, the leaves get stuck, the water flows down, and then you do have to kind of clean that off every so often. There is the first flush diverter, which I already talked about that, but that basically shunts away the first rainwater. You might have the screens on the tank. And then the other thing is the color of your tank. Your tank should always be dark colored so algae doesn't grow. Sometimes people they're called IPC totes. They're those clear white kind of square totes that have a metal frame around them. They're used also for transporting food grade materials so they can be repurposed for rain collection. And they definitely can work, but because of the color, they need to be protected. So they would need some type of painting or covering or something to make them suitable to have the quality of the water stay good. So just to be aware of that. Here's another picture of that leaf screen. You can see what it looks like. Getting from the gutter into the leaf screen. I know some people are really interested in rain chains. They're really beautiful. There's variations on the standard gutter, and you can see that any type of moving water from your gutters down to the ground, any type that you can think of can work with this. So it could be your standard version, just the kind of gutter, it could be the rain chain, it could be the scupper, if I'm pronouncing that right, just the different ways people like to move water that can all work. First flush diverter. Not all systems have it. So I want to show you a couple of options. If you live in a climate where it rains really frequently, then you definitely don't need it because the roof is not building up a lot of debris. But if you live in a place where it does build up, we also have like ash and things from fires. Don't want that to get into our rain tank. It's important to have, and it's not too hard to. So I would definitely recommend it if in our climate, especially with forest fires and other debris and things that get onto our roofs that we don't want to go into our tank. So there's two kind of common locations for it. In the middle image, you can see it's right up against the house. So the rain will fall into that big tube strip. First, there's a ball that you can't see that's inside that floats, plugs the top, and then the clean water goes into the tank. You can also put it against the tank. So if you don't want to have that against your house, you can move it over to be right by the tank. That is an option too. So now you have the rain, you have your inlet, and it's clean. You kept screened the tank, you kept the colors dark so you don't have algae growing, and now you want to use the water. So the easiest way is to just put a garden hose on it, or if you could kind of create a little place to fit a garden or a watering can. Those totally work. You also can set up for a gravity fed drip system. For it to be worth your while, usually you would want to have, I'd say maybe 1,000 or more gallons of storage for it. Though maybe if you had, upper hundreds, that would also be worth your while. It would kind of just be you would want to figure that out for yourself, what feels right, investing in the system or hand watering, but you can definitely connect it into a gravity drip system. It doesn't work with all drip components, so make sure that you are doing the research and getting the right components that are going to work for this low pressure situation. It's not actually, just gravity because you have the pressure of the water higher in the tank, but it's a lot lower pressure than your garden spigot. When I use my rainwater tank, I'm like, oh, it takes a lot longer to flow out of this because it's just a lower pressure. So having it into a gravity drip system can be nice because then you don't have to stand there with the hose and water. It can take a long time. If you have a big garden and if you have a big tank, you can just turn your timer on for longer and get the same amount of water out of it. So if you do have the bigger system and you do want to invest in the gravity drip, there's several options. In the resources I'll give you, you can read these in detail. You don't have to remember all of this, but this is a picture. I wrote a book that has this in it. It's called Water Wise Home. So it takes you through how to transform your home to be more water wise, including using rainwater. So some of these pictures are from that. So you can see that your gravity system can irrigate bushes. It could irrigate a vegetable bed. It could irrigate berries. There's a lot of different types of ways to spread out that rainwater. And then you have your overflow. So even with the big tank, it's going to fill up and the extra water has to go somewhere. Make sure your overflow is the same as your inlet. You don't want to restrict the flow and then you'll cause a backage, which could cause problems up on your roof or wherever you've tapped in because the water is not being able to flow through your system quickly enough. So always size your overflow the same as your inlet. Your overflow should go somewhere suitable. So having a rain garden is a great place, or a vegetated area somewhere where that can soak up the rain. If you're able to have it go to a rain garden and with a tree planted, then the tree can shade your rain tank and that can help keep the water cooler. And if the summer is really hot, there's ways where you can just increase the benefits of this resource of your system. If you might want to have a screen or what's called a backwater valve on your overflow. And the reason you might want to is sometimes in dry places in particular, rodents can be really attracted to water and they might want to climb up your system and then die in your tank. And that would be really gross and you wouldn't want that. So you can kind of suss out how you feel about taking that risk or not, but it's pretty easy to just screen your overflow or put what's called a backwater valve. It's just it's like a little flapper that just easily opens, but if you push against it in the opposite direction, it closes and won't move. So that's a way to protect your tank from anything that wants to crawl up through that overflow. And then just to end with some of the indoor rainwater systems, one thing that's really attractive about using rainwater indoors is you save a lot more water. So if you're using rainwater for irrigation, basically what we're trying to do is save the winter rain for use of the summer, but we don't have enough room to actually store all the winter rain. So we just store a portion of it. With an indoor system, we need to flush our toilets all year long if we have flushed toilets, and if we can do it to our laundries or washing our clothes all year long. And so we can be using our rainwater throughout the rainy season. So we're drawing down our tank a little bit and then it's filling again, and we draw it down, it fills again. So a smaller tank even can actually save more water because you're drawing down and refilling over and over and over all winter long. So if you're able to, of course, these systems cost a lot more because not only do you have the tank and all that part, but that now you have to have a pump and you have to have filtration and disinfection, and then you have permitting fees too. But if you're able to, it's a way to save even more water and to make your home kind of more resilient because you have this extra water supply that can even go into your home and be used rather than just having it outside for irrigation. And one thing I didn't mention is for emergency preparedness, having a rainwater system is a big benefit, because if you don't draw it all the way down, you're going to have hundreds of gallons, depending on the size. You're going to have a lot of water for storage for an emergency situation. And you can just have like a backpacking drinking water filter, and you could use that water in an emergency situation if the water supply was shut off. So that's another benefit that a lot of catchment system owners view their rainwater source as. They see this big tank and they think about that as, that's going to help me if there is an emergency. So I just want to share a couple of examples. These are used in larger buildings too. This is one, I live in Eugene, and this is a system that was installed during the development of the building. So it was like planned into this building, and you can see this giant tank. This definitely needs a permit. It's very tall and narrow and needs to be done properly so it doesn't fall over. And it's a big, 16,000 gallon. I think there's 2 of these, and they use this for indoor use as well as outdoor. So they're flushing the toilets and they're doing the laundry with this water, saving a bunch of water all year long. Here's a residential scale, a potable system on Lopez Island. So again, you can see it's big because this is the only water supply for this home. And this is kind of the schematics, and you guys are going to have this recording. So if you're interested in looking more in detail about the schematics, this is for a residential indoor reuse system for toilet flushing. And this was done in Santa Cruz, California. So you can see what kind of drawings and information you would be providing if you went this route to give to your permitting agency. And just to end on some, these are also used even bigger scale. There are tanks that are buried. So a lot of the commercial projects that have these very large, 10, 20, 30,000 gallon cisterns, they'll bury them. So they fit into, these more dense, tight lots that have a lot of water need, under parking lots, under pathways, under walking areas. There's a lot of options. So if you plan it during the construction, then these systems can really be integrated in. This example is in Santa Monica. They have in one of their library branches, they were redoing the library and they're working at this whole city is trying to be what's called net zero. So they're trying to, if they have a new water demand, they're trying to offset that water somewhere else, either by conservation or reuse, rainwater, other water sources. So this is an example of what they did, and you can see some of the components of the screening and the treatment. So typical costs. The outdoor systems, those are the lowest cost. If you can get a repurposed barrel, sometimes you can kind of call around restaurants, will on occasion have 1 or 2. You can get them free sometimes. It might be harder because a lot of people are interested, but it's still possible. You find a place that doesn't produce a lot of barrels, and if you get lucky, you can get one for free. And then you just have to spend, I don't know, 10, 20, maybe $30 on the little components, and you can have a system set up. Maybe you don't have that much time, or your community doesn't have any and you have to buy one. The rain barrels typically are quite low cost, and they're often given away for free in different areas. So if you're a do-it-yourself project, you can really lower the cost. If you want to purchase a tank, you want more storage, and you want to have it installed, you can think about, the cost for just the tank, you can think about 50 cents per gallon up to $1 per gallon. The lowest cost tanks are this green plastic cylinder type. Those ones are more like 50, 60 cents per gallon. The ones that are more kind of narrow and the ribbed plastic that are different colors, you can get one to maybe match your house. Those ones are more like the $1 per gallon. But of course, it really varies a lot. So I don't want to quote you on any numbers, but I just want to give you the range. And then if you hire somebody, that there's going to be labor. The advantage of hiring someone is that they can source all the materials and really make sure that you think about everything. So if you're able to, definitely encourage you to work with a professional. If you are interested, if you want to do it yourself, it's super fun and not too hard. You saw a lot of these components, and you can, once you get the tank sited, that can be the hardest part. Once you do that, the rest of it's usually not too hard. There's a little bit of ladder work to get into the gutters. The rest of it's plastic pipe and pretty straightforward for a do-it-yourselfer. If you want to do an indoor system, then unless you're a plumbing contractor or building contractor, then you probably want to hire a professional because the system gets more complicated. Great project to have some neighbors help. You can see this picture. This was a system where it was in the backyard of an urban lot. So there was everywhere had fences. So we had to lift the tank over the fence and then go through this garden. So we had a lot of hands, made it really easy to get it over there. Most people are not so lucky to have that many people helping them move their tank. So I'm going to end with some design considerations and then some resources. So as you're thinking about implementing this in your homes, I encourage you to first think about, what are you going to use the water for? So if you really want to irrigate native plants, you can put in a rain garden and no plastic, no other than moving the land and buying the plants. There's very little materials involved. You just have to get the water into your rain garden and then have an overflow, but it's very natural, very low impact and affordable if you do the digging yourself. If you hire someone, of course, that's a lot of labor, and so there is cost to that, of course. If you want to help the environment, prevent stormwater pollution, then a rain garden is the way to go. If you want to irrigate your vegetable garden or maybe your fruit trees, that's when you need to store the water. And so then you would look at rain barrels or your rain tank. So after you've identified that, then you want to think about where can you locate the system. So look at your gutters, look at where your downspouts come down, look at which downspout is connected to what section of your home. Sometimes homes have little porches, so they have these little small section of roof. So one downspout is only catching like half of a porch. That would not be a good downspout to focus on. So pay attention to what is the downspout capturing, how much of your roof, and where might you be able to direct that water, either into a rain garden or into a tank. And then of course, don't forget about screens and your overflows and where you're going to put the extra water, all of that. So just to end with some resources and then we'll do questions. I put some websites for learning more. Graywater Action, we have rain harvesting information. There's also harvestingrainwater.com. That is there's a little blue book in the lower corner called Rainwater Harvesting. That's the website of Brad Lancaster, who wrote that book. He has another rainwater book, and he's got a great resource. He's mostly focused on in-ground, like rain garden type harvesting, but he covers all of the different types of rainwater harvesting. There's watertoolkit.org. That's another resource that is focused on California, but it has good info about all these different rainwater systems. There's ARCSA. ARCSA is the American Rainwater Catchment System Association. So that is a professional association that has a resource guide to help people find professionals. So professionals can get ARCSA certified, and then they get listed on their website. So you could find someone trained in rainwater who's certified through ARCSA, and that way you know that they've had the proper training to put in your system. There are people who could do a great job who may have not gone through ARCSA, so I don't want you to think that's the only place to look for installers, but that's a good place to start if you are having trouble finding people locally. Then if you want to do it yourself for buying materials, Blue Barrel Systems, they sell those kits that can be adapted to any of those blue barrels, and they help people find barrels in their area. So they're for a smaller rain barrel type system. And then if you're wanting to do a tank, rainharvest.com is an online source for that. There's also local stores. I don't know where all of you are or what all the stores are in all of your areas, but I would say find your local irrigation store. They often, if they're kind of on the forefront, being more progressive, they might sell materials, and maybe the Soil and Water Conservation District could also give you some pointers about where to go, depending on where you live. So I'm going to end there. Oops, I came out of my presentation. I'm going to end there and see if you guys have questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. That was really great to see all those resources. So we had a couple of questions already, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and include them in the Q&A. There's a little button at the bottom of your screen that you can type your questions into. And while everyone's writing their questions in, we can go ahead and start on some of the ones we've already received. So I had a couple of questions about your slides. A lot of folks really enjoyed seeing your slides, and we're hoping that we might be able to share them after the presentation. Is that possible that we can share the slides out to everyone?
Yeah, definitely. I can send you the presentation, and then if you could attach it or.
Yeah, that sounds great. If you want to send me the presentation, I can make sure to include that in the follow-up email for everyone to see. So if anyone is hoping to see a closer version of any of those photos or the diagrams that Laura had shown tonight, I will make sure to include the slides in that follow-up email that I'll send to everyone. So you will be able to see those as well as the websites under the resources that you just shown. Another question we had from prior to the webinar, one person is hoping to store rainwater at an uphill site from their roof. Would you have any suggestions on moving water to an uphill storage location, or do most of those storage locations need to be downhill?
If you're able to have a downhill storage, then it's better. But there are, oops, my computer got started. Am I okay?
Yep, yeah. You're so good.
Okay. Oh, it just shifted. It got darker. It shifted to dark mode. Okay.
Of course.
So there are systems that do pump up to a storage area. The challenge with that is it totally depends on your situation, but one potential challenge you could run into is it's when it's raining, when there's a storm, it's your little tank that's near your house. You have to have a transfer. You have to have a small tank pump, transfer it up to your big storage. Your little transfer tank is getting flooded, the power goes out, now you're losing all the rainwater from that storm because your power went out and your pump's not pumping. So if you're relying on electricity and the power goes out, then you don't have any, you lost all that rain. So that's a disadvantage. And then you're using electricity, which that has an impact. But if that's your only option, yes, you can totally do that. People do that. It's just a less desirable option than if you could fill it by gravity.
Always good to go with gravity and never fight. That's good motto to live by.
Storms, they don't affect gravity.
That's the truth. So we had somebody ask, they have a cement cistern from that's on a small farm. Are they able to use that, or do you have any recommendations to make that be able to be useful in storing and harvesting rainwater?
Yeah, I mean, cement cisterns can be great. You'd probably want to check it out yourself, or maybe have someone just make sure it's holding water, so you don't spend a lot of time trying to get it all up and running and find out it has a big leak in it. So you'd probably want to just, if you haven't been using it, to make sure that it's holding water. There's nothing dead down there, that kind of thing. I'm guessing it's an underground cistern. Yeah, just check it out and make sure it's okay.
That makes sense. The other question we had was about the resources that you just shown. We'll make sure to include that. They'll be in the presentation slides, so anyone who needs to take a look at those can access them that way. And I can also look through and include direct links if needed as well. We don't have any other questions thus far, so I think we might be okay for the evening. Oh, so one just came in. I spoke too soon. Okay, so this person has done a lot of Googling, but they're still interested to hear if you have any advice on how you can install a 3K downspout tank for garden irrigation, or how to find somebody who's able to install that.
A 3,000 downspout tank. I am not familiar with that. So if you're talking about like a 3,000 gallon tank, that I could answer, but if it's a specific thing, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it sounds like it's just a big tank. So probably a 3,000 gallon tank.
My house, we have a 3,000 gallon tank. And there's Grady barrels. So I don't know where you live, the person asking this, but Grady barrels, Patrick, he is an installer and he works a lot around Oregon. So I know he installs in Eugene and outside of Eugene. He's a great, really experienced rainwater installer. And 3,000 gallons is like small in his world. So I can recommend him personally. I've worked with him. But where you live, I don't know. But I would say that there's nothing different between a 200 gallon plastic tank and a 3,000 gallon plastic tank. One's just bigger than the other. So they're not hard. It's not like complicated. You're just getting the water in, you're having the leaf screens. So the size might feel intimidating because that's a lot of water, but the complexity of installing the system is really just basically the same as any size tank, as long as you're working again on the flat ground and it's the stable type of tank.
And I know one operator within our Washington County area is Oregon Rain Harvesting. Michael Martins, I know, operates there. And I know he is a pretty reputable source that we've worked on a couple of projects with. So, and if you are in the Washington County area, Oregon Rain Harvesting is another one that I know we've worked with in the past.
Great. Yeah, and there's a lot of installers in Portland that probably go.
Yeah, we're pretty close, easy shot from Portland, so I'm sure many of them would easily be able to come out. So just depend on where your locations are, and if not, again, if you're not in this general region, look up your local SWCD, and I'm sure they can also make some similar recommendations. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I think just got another one. Yeah. So
City. I can read them now.
Oh, perfect. Sounds great.
So small rain barrel in Oregon City. I'm not familiar with installers in Oregon City. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And most of those.
Go ahead. I would say that if there's any, because a rain barrel, a handy person can do that. So if there's a handy person that or just want to go through your next door or get someone that is trustworthy. It's a very small system. And so anyone that can use a drill and basically can put in a rain barrel. So you don't need to find a specialized installer for a small system. They should have a good resource to make sure they don't make common mistakes. There is screening something, a new person might not think of that, make sure mosquitoes aren't in there, but with a good resource and someone that can use basic tools, those two things together, you can get a rain barrel installed. So just find someone that you like and trust and have them have a good resource, which you'll get in the follow-up email.
And I know that we've also seen I've also seen a couple of different fact sheets out there that particularly talk about rain barrels that I'll look up a good one and include that in that follow-up email. So you can have a good kind of diagram to help with installing small rain barrels. Well, I think that might be our last question for this evening. So thank you again, Laura. And we will, as I mentioned, send that follow-up email to everyone that will have the slides for tonight, as well as some additional resources that we've discussed. I really enjoyed seeing the presentation tonight, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everybody.